The Druid's Unearthed Arcana playtest experience has been weird. Despite only arriving for the first time in the 4th UA, it's now on its 3rd revision, and it had one of the most, if not the most controversial changes proposed in the form of templated wild shape, which resulted in some massive backlash. So much so that the design team nearly completely reverted course when the second iteration of the onednd Druid was revealed in UA 6, where they largely reverted wild shape back to its 2014 form, albeit with a few quality of life improvements. In that same UA though, the class was also massively overhauled, but in ways that didn't really make a lot of sense. Some of those features felt a little bit half-baked, some were way too good, and others just felt like they were throwing whatever they could at the class to see what would stick. I'd probably argue that the onednd Druid, throughout all of its revisions, has felt the least cohesive and like the team is really unsure about what exactly they're trying to do with the class, closely trailed by the Ranger. So now here we are in UA 8 with the newest iteration of the Druid, and I feel just about as lost and dumbfounded as I have for every Druid video that I've made so far. So few changes have been made between this version and what we saw in UA 6 that honestly I'm wondering why they even bothered including it again when other classes like the Bard or the Fighter even probably could have made much better use of another pass through the process. It almost feels like they kind of forgot about it and then scrambled to throw something together. This video is going to be a little bit different. We will go over the changes made to both the base class and the Circle of the Moon Druid, but I'm also going to go over some of the things that haven't changed in an effort to highlight what I hope to see from a final published version of the class coming out in 2024. I'm trying to reach a goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and it's getting really close and feeling actually possible thanks to all of your support. So if you'd like to help me reach some new milestones, a sub to the channel would really mean a lot. Thank you. The first change that I want to address isn't really much of a change at all actually, it's just a really oddly specific wording update that they've made which really highlights some of the bizarre inconsistencies we're seeing here. The Warden option in the first level Primal Order feature has had its wording very slightly adjusted. The UA 6 version read, "Train for battle, you gain martial weapon proficiency and medium armor training," whereas the UA 8 version reads, "Train for battle, you gain martial weapon proficiency and armor training with medium armor." Again, this really has no mechanical impact on anything really, but I find it so strange that they went out of their way to really spell out how this otherwise incredibly clear feature works, but then left in heaps of ambiguity in many of the new conjure spells and the Barbarian's new Brutal Strike feature. I've talked about both of these in their respective videos though, so I'm not going to go into it here. It's kind of like they just sat down to work on the Druid one day, they made this one change and called it a day. Maybe that's a little bit too harsh, but you'll probably see what I mean. The only real change of substance that's come to the Druid base class in UA 8 is to wild shape. It's still largely the same as it was in UA 6, but it has had a few adjustments to improve it. Firstly, the number of beast forms you know has increased. In UA 6, you would know 3, 4, and 5 at 2nd, 4th, and 8th levels respectively. Now, you always know an amount of beast forms equal to 2 plus half your Druid level rounded up. Keep that in mind. While sure, this is an improvement in the sense that you are able to know more beast forms, from a design perspective, it's just really clunky. You shouldn't need to remember all these awkward equations to know how to prepare such a basic feature. Honestly, if they're committing to this being the newest version of wild shape, they should probably just include a known forms column on the Druid table and call it a day. One other point about the known forms is that this section explicitly states that you can choose from the beast stat block in the player's handbook. This is a nice refinement that makes it feel a bit less overwhelming. We don't know exactly how many beasts will be present in the new PHB, and I still don't like that players should have to trawl through the monster stat blocks to use a core feature, but at least the amount is relatively constrained now. It is worth noting that the document does state that the 2024 Player's Handbook will contain more wild shape forms than the 2014 one did, and that with the DM's approval, a player can look to the monster manual and other sources beyond the Player's Handbook. There are a few other changes that are worth mentioning too. Firstly, you now gain temporary hit points whenever you assume a wild shape form, but the amount is only equal to that of your Druid level. I suppose any bonus is better than nothing, but it feels incredibly low to the point of being inconsequential. Secondly, they seemingly arbitrarily removed the rounding qualifier about how long you can be in your wild shape form for no clear reason other than to create confusion, I guess. It now reads that you can stay in that form for a number of hours equal to half your Druid level, or until some other certain conditions are met. Both the 5e version and the UA 6 version specified that it was an amount of hours equal to half of your Druid level rounded down, which in itself was actually confusing since the player's handbook specifically states that unless otherwise specified, the general rule for any fraction is to round down, but previous versions of wild shape still included the text to specify that you do round down. So now what, since it doesn't say anything? If I'm a 3rd level druid, can I transform for an hour and a half, since that's what the text says? Do I round down because that's the general rule, so I can transform for an hour? Did they remove it so you aren't just trying to juggle the awkward equations of known forms where you round up, but here where you round down? I honestly, I don't know. And sure, I get that it might not seem like a big deal whether you can wild shape for an extra half hour or not, but it's just these really weird inconsistencies that are created that feel so awkward coming from the same team that went back to reword medium armor training versus armor training with medium armor. Like, come on. How are we supposed to explain this to a new player? The final change to wild shape is that as compared to the UA 6 version, you no longer retain your species traits when you transform, which honestly makes sense. So now your wild shape wolf can't just start flying because your druid was a fairy. This is probably for the best. Before I move on from wild shape, allow me to lament one last time over what could have been. Wild shape templates were a wonderful idea that never got to really see the light of day, largely due to a lot of knee-jerk reactions. But so many people have come around to the idea on the templates, it's honestly staggering. The templates, while very poorly executed in their debut in UA4, solved so many issues that wild shape inherently had, from poor scaling to simplicity of finding creatures to simplicity of using the creatures. I'm honestly still sad that it's gone, but I hope the concept will live on in something else. For what it is now, this iteration of wild shape feels better than the 2014 version. It's more controlled with nice improvements, but I still can't help but long for what could have been. Anyway, I've talked about wild shape templates plenty of times before. I'll leave a link if you're interested in hearing my thoughts in full. The other big changes to the class come to the Circle of the Moon subclass. Level 3 grants the new feature Circle Spells, which provides a subset of spells that you always have prepared and can cast while you're in your wild shape form. While the list of spells is a little bit underwhelming, I do like the design shift to setting a predefined list of spells that can be cast while in wild shape, and not like the previous iterations where you could just cast spells of the Abjuration school. Also at 3rd level, you gain the Circle Forms feature, which is renamed from Combat Wild Shape. This feature largely accomplishes the same thing that Combat Wild Shape did, but does so in far fewer words, and it's just so much easier to both parse and actually use. No more weird comparisons need to be made to determine your armor class or the amount of temporary hit points that you gain. Now your AC is just 13 plus your wisdom modifier. It's very clean and simple, and likely to yield for some pretty tanky beasts. The same goes for temporary hit points. You now just gain an amount equal to 3 times your druid level. Also, the challenge rating for the creatures you can transform into now is your druid level divided by 3, rounded down, which for some reason they felt the need to note here. So for those of you keeping track at home, that means that 1. A druid can transform for an amount of time equal to half of their druid level. It's unclear if they round up, down, or not at all. 2. They can now know an amount of beast forms equal to 2 plus half of their druid level rounded up. 3. They gain temporary hit points equal to their druid level, unless you're a Circle of the Moon druid, in which case it's 3 times your druid level. 4. The CR for the Circle of the Moon druid wild shapes is equal to your druid level divided by 3, rounded down. Like, yeah, sure, after a while you're probably just gonna remember all of these, but come on, is this really what we've landed on after 3 revisions of the class? The 6th level feature, Improved Circle Form, still lets you decide whether an attack in your wild shape form deals either its normal damage type or radiant damage, but it also allows you to add your wisdom modifier to your constitution saving throws while you're in your wild shape form. This is a nice little toughness bonus for sure, but I'm just not so sold on this taking up your 6th level feature. The 10th level feature, Moonlight Step, hasn't changed at all, and I just don't get it. The feature doesn't really feel like it fits with the class, except for the fact that the team is really trying hard to cram the whole moon themed stuff in there. Finally, the 14th level feature, Lunar Form, incorporates what I have to assume is the design team's attempt at scaling wild-shaped creatures, which famously scale very poorly in the mid and higher levels of play, and they accomplish this by adding 1d10 radiant damage on a hit. Sweet. I mean, again, it's not nothing, but it doesn't really feel great. Also, shared moonlight still exists. It's hard to not feel anything other than adequately whelmed by the UA8 Druid. It's not that I think it's bad, it just kind of feels forgotten and like it's a hodgepodge of different design experiments that the team has been testing out over the last year and a half. To exemplify that, I wanted to take a look into some of the Druid class features, the ones that didn't change, and highlight how they aren't really consistent with the rest of the updated design language. First up is the 5th level feature, Wild Resurgence. Just why? It looks like that crusade that I declared victory over in my Barbarian video to remove all the features that allow you to regenerate a resource only when you have none left is not over after all. Sure, this one might not be quite as egregious as some of the other examples of this, but why? There's no point in this restriction. It's not interesting, it doesn't add anything to the class or make you feel smart or clever for executing it. It's just an arbitrary gate that prevents me from using an otherwise valuable feature that already has a cost associated with it. Just let me expend my spell slots when I want to convert them into wild shape uses. We've moved away from this design, even in this same document, with features like the monk's uncanny metabolism and perfect discipline, though to a lesser extent, and with the barbarian's persistent rage. Both the barbarian and the monk features were published at the same time as this revised version of the Druid, so what happened? Did they just forget to keep their designs consistent? Was it a different team working on this class? Was it intentional and they have some kind of grand design? I don't know. I hate these things though, as if that wasn't clear enough already, and I can't wait for them to be gone. The 7th level feature, Elemental Fury, just hasn't changed at all. My feedback here is the same as it was in UA 6, which is to say that since this is a choice and you don't get both, neither independently feel worthy of a 7th level feature, but getting both might be a little bit too good. The designs are fine, I suppose. They lean into favoring wild shape or spellcasting, which is neat, but the execution just feels like it falls a little bit short. 9th level Communion with Nature is just another spell feature. I thought we had done away with these months ago. Even the revised Sorcerer, which was riddled with these in UA 6, had all of them essentially removed in UA 7, which came out in September, and yet here we are 3 months later with the identical feature still in place. Not even a single free cast of the spell per long rest. We can do better. Improved Elemental Fury comes at 15th level and also hasn't received a single change. You still have one choice, which increases your damage while in melee range by an additional 1d8, or you can opt for Potent Spellcasting, which effectively increases your damage by infinity since you can hit enemies from 300 feet away with your cantrips. This basically just lets you snipe anything out of existence since they'll never really catch up to you because you can always just keep moving to maintain that 300-foot distance. How hasn't this been changed? Who would win, one Druid boy with Frostbite or a Tarask? Finally, the 20th level feature, Archdruid. And this one is so weird to me since Jeremy Crawford specifically mentioned in multiple videos that this was a feature which probably needed a little bit of fine tuning, and yet here it is, identical in form to the UA 6 version. I'm not even going to address Evergreen Wild Shape. I don't think my heart can take it anymore. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not that I think that the UA 8 version of the Druid is bad. I really don't think that it is, but it does absolutely feel forgotten or neglected in some way. In a world where classes are able to actually utilize and regenerate their resources and are getting access to these amazing capstones, the Druid just feels left behind, and it really makes me wonder why they bothered putting this into the UA to not really be looking for much insight at all. Sure, it's totally possible that they've already planned changes for all the features that I mentioned, but only wanted to test out Wild Shape, but if that were the case, I really think it would have been a nice idea to include a design note saying as much. Because as it stands right now, I have no idea what's going on with the Druid. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to help me reach that goal of 5,000 subs by the end of the year. Check out some of my other onednd videos, but otherwise, take care.